In this video, you will learn everything you need to know about Databox, including how to build reports, how to ingest data, and how to use some of the cool AI new features like MCP. I have helped more than 100 companies figure out how to turn their data into insights. I'll show you the 5-step process you can use with Databox to go from scattered KPIs to a centralized dashboard that helps you understand performance. Step number 1. Ingest your data. So let's look at the Databox interface and go to the data manager. And this is where you have your different data sources. So you may have ad platforms here, such as Meta, Google, and TikTok. You may have a CRM like HubSpot, analytics data from, let's say, Google Analytics, and many more. One of the key things with data sources is you want it to be easy and reliable over the long term. Databox has, I think, about 130 integrations out of the box that you can use. And if you look at the list here, you'll recognize many of them. MailChimp, we have Intercom, Klaviyo, Mixpanel, Harvest. And many of these integrations simply require an authentication with your username and password, what is typically called SSO, single sign-on, or you may be provided an API key by your data source, and then Databox is able to connect using their APIs and ingest data. But the key thing here is Databox is doing all the heavy lifting for you behind the scenes, which means that as data sources face errors or timeouts and a bunch of other things, Databox will be able to resolve them. I have built many of these integrations manually, directly with the tools themselves. And I can tell you, it's really annoying work to maintain them over a long period because eventually they break. I also want to highlight a couple data sources that I think are particularly flexible. If we go down here to the warehouse integrations, so we're going to see data warehouses here like Snowflake, BigQuery, Amazon Redshift, which means that if one of your tools is not in this list, one of the easiest ways you can fix that is by moving that data into a data warehouse and then bringing it with one of the pre-built connections. There's a custom API solution. Let me see if we search for it here. This one, where you could integrate with any REST API. This could be a possibility depending on what the data source offers, and it would allow you even more flexibility. Though in my experience, I really like the data warehouse option for any kind of unusual data sources. There's a lot high level control. Typically, data warehouses are quite cheap. And then if you have to do any kind of transformations to the data, you can do that easily in a data warehouse using SQL, or you can get a developer to help you. Let me show you what a full integration process looks like. I'm actually going to connect a Google Analytics 4 account from my website. We can see here, we give it a name. We can share this connection with the rest of your team if you have multiple team members. Then let's go into the connect. You will be asked to enter your Google SSO account. I'm going to choose this one. You get permissions to Databox, all pretty standard. I'm going to choose my website. Then we get a sync frequency, which does change depending on what plan you have. For now, I'm actually going to keep it to every 24 hours. But you can see this process takes a couple minutes at most. Once you have the right accounts with the right permissions, it is very, very easy to bring in new data and have this integration now sync historical data and keep syncing data on whatever frequency you chose. Step 2, let's do transformations and prepare our data for reporting. Now we have our Google Analytics data connected. Let's now go into the data sources and we get the opportunity to transform our data if needed. This is an optional step. You don't have to do any transformations. You do get a bunch of things out of the box, but we have to make sure that what we need in terms of metrics and dimensions are actually in the data source. We can see that we actually have 63 metrics. Let's click into that. And this, because it's an out-of-box connection, tells us all the metrics that will be available for Google Analytics 4. Pretty standard stuff from a Google Analytics perspective. We're going to have sessions and users and views and engagement rate, revenue. I think it's helpful to select the most important metrics from this data source and then add them to the My Metrics section. So for example, we can take the total users and we can add that as a number, or we could do some kind of filter. For example, if we only wanted to look at the total users on desktop, we could do that. And then that metric will be total users on desktop, not overall total users. In this case though, we're going to do none. And then we're just going to add it here. And now when you go to My Metrics, you'll see that we have a new chart that's showing us total users. In this case, it's month to date, but we will have the ability to change date ranges. And I'll show you how all of this plays out when you actually start building reports. We can do light transformations here within Databox. If we look at the same data source and we do a data set, this will allow us to take our Google Analytics data. For example, let's look at the country report. And here are the potential columns and metrics we can get from Google Analytics. We're going to take the date with the time zone, an ID. Let's take the country name, and let's take total users. Since we're thinking about that, let's preview our data to make sure this is what we expect. We have all our countries broken down by, looks like this is daily, and then total users. Okay, we can now continue on. We get a choice of how much historical data we want. Let's actually only take historical data from the last 30 days or so. We'll give it the same 24-hour daily frequency. And now Databox will query the Google Analytics API to get the specific data for us and keep it up to date every 24 hours. This is helpful if you don't see the metric that you care about, but you know it's in your data source. Not only that, once we have our custom data set, we can do transformations in this data. For example, in the country, we could do filters where we're going to say what we only want United States data. So now all our data is filtered, and when we save it, our data set will only have United States data. Let's remove this filter. The other thing we can do is we can add columns here. Let's do a column to the right, and now we can run formulas on this column. For example, perhaps of the country, we may have something like market and region, and we could have a formula here where we might say, if the country value is the United States, then we're going to add value of North America. Otherwise, we do something else. We do quite a bit of formulas here. It's very similar to Excel. But the cool thing here is, again, you're working with data that comes from an API that's being refreshed on some kind of frequency, and then allows you to do this light transformations on top of it. We will save this for now. And now our data set has custom metrics that we can use that have been filtered, and we created a completely brand new column here called market and region. There's even one more step you can take here where you can actually merge data from two different sources into a single data set. You might combine, for example, attribution data from ad platforms like Meta and Google, let's say ad spend, clicks, and impressions, and then combine that with CRM data from HubSpot, align them on, let's say, UTM source to combine both data sources, and now you can see ad performance with conversions from your CRM. One quick note before we move on to the next section. You can get started with Databox for free using their 14-day free trial. There's a link in the description, or you can scan the QR code on the screen. I want to thank Databox for sponsoring this video. I have used their tool for years, and it's great to be able to finally work closer with them on my YouTube channel. Let's move on to the next section. Step 3, let's now build dashboards. In the world of Databox, dashboards are called data boards, and they kind of look like this. This is actually just a sample dashboard, but you can see it's the same chart widget style, and you can put different ones and resize them. But what I want to show you, which I really like, are actually the public templates. You can see there's a lot of templates that you can use out of the box. There's a couple of Google Analytics ones, which we will use, but there's acquisition templates, templates for YouTube, ad platforms, Google Search Console, sales performance from Shopify. So if we look at the Google Analytics templates, let's actually use this one. We click the Use Template. We then choose our Google Analytics data source, and then we click Continue. And it's going to create a data board with our Google Analytics data, and it all does it in less than 60 seconds. This is a fantastic starting point, and you can then go on to customize as needed. Now, it's not always perfect. You can see here that the conversions report didn't come through. I think my Google Analytics account actually doesn't use the conversions functionality. But then we have sessions by channel, user and sessions, the audience overview, path and query string breakdown. And now let's look at the edit functionality. We can visualize things in different types of charts. We can give it a title. We have our date range. In this case, we have made everything in the last 30 days, but we could make this last quarter, last month. There is lots of different popular date types. And then for each of the metrics in this specific report, it's given us a source for it. So we have total users, which we saw before. We had sessions. We can select here the metrics that Google Analytics gave us, which is quite a bit. We can swap out as we desire. For example, we can try active users instead. And we're going to call this active users here. And now that number in the widget itself will change. If we look at another chart like this one, similar concept. In this case, this is a line chart. We gave it a title of users versus sessions. We're graphing by day, but we can graph by week if we wanted to. And perhaps in that case, maybe something like a last 90 days might make the most sense. We can see about 12 weeks worth of data. And then we have the same selection of metrics. And in this case, we can give it specific colors to tell them apart. We do have data board-wide filters. For example, you can filter all the data here by a specific dimension provided by Google Analytics, or you can change the entire date range of all the data here to perhaps make the entire data board 90 days instead of the 30-day filter. And remember that you can swap out any of these individual charts with another metric from another data source. You could have 3 charts that correspond to a Google Analytics 4 metric, and then 2 that correspond to a Facebook ads metric, and then 1 from a Google ads metric. Once you finish customizing your data board, you have a few ways on how to share this with the rest of your team. You could have an internal link, which only works for any user that's already inside Databox. You could enable some kind of public link, and this will be available to anyone without an account. And you can have a few other options like maybe protect it with a password or limit to specific IP addresses in your office. You can share this with specific users. You can send a snapshot to individuals. So perhaps you want to send just a copy of this dashboard right now to specific emails and then include a link for them to see it. This can be helpful if you have any kind of external stakeholders that you don't want to add to Databox, but you still want them to be able to view the data. You can embed this in an internal website. You can put this on TVs, which I'm always a big fan of. If you're inside the office, just be able to have the data boards show on your TV. And if you have multiple data boards, you can typically actually just swipe through them automatically. You're able to show different KPIs at different times. Step 4, you build reports. Now, just like data boards, we do have templates we can use to get started. Let's actually look at the Google Analytics 4 report template. From a starting point, this looks very similar to the data boards we were looking at earlier. The difference, as you can see here, is that we do have the ability to add text or summaries below those specific data board metrics. We can have multiple pages with perhaps different metrics. You get a chance to edit this data board just as before. You can make the same changes and filters we saw in the previous section. And then if we make this a little bigger here, then here we have the chance to be able to add text. I love context. Not everyone is as deeply involved in the data as you might be. Any kind of context we can give them on the numbers they're about to see to understand what happened over the last 30 days. How does that compare to previous 30 days? Any caveats, any FYIs we should know. This is a fantastic place to be able to show all that context alongside a specific data board. Then also you can see here that we can do this as a page. And in between them, we can add images, we can add other tables, other kind of data we might want to show. And then we have text here. And then this is a document/report that can be sent. The one we were looking at earlier is more of a slide idea. And we have a present option where we might present this to stakeholders and give sense of what the numbers look like. Like before, we can have a shareable link here. We can download a PDF and we can send the report via email or schedule it to be sent later. One of my favorite functionalities here is the ability to schedule things. So you can schedule this report to go out on some kind of frequency. We know the metrics themselves that the data board charts will update on their own based on whatever parameters you establish. The text will always be the same, and that will need to be updated before this is sent. So one more thing we want to do when it comes to reporting data is look at some of the AI features Databox has been adding. Throughout Databox, you will see this kind of messages here where it tells you what is going on in your account. We can also go into our metric, and you'll see there's this little icon here that if we click that, it will gather the latest data and then run it through an LLM and give you a bit of a summary as to what is going on in this particular metric. That is, are the numbers improving? And then down here, it gives you some ideas on how to improve the numbers further. So this is one of the examples of some of the AI functionality that Databox has added, not just to tell you what the numbers are, but to help you understand what might be going on and how this number compare previously. The second way you can use AI to interact with your data is MCP. This is the Model Context Protocol. Typically, it allows you to connect your Databox data into one of the most popular LLMs, such as Claude, ChatGPT, or Gemini. Let me show you here Claude. If you go to your Pro account, and you go into Settings, and then you add it here as a connector, and then typically it asks you to authenticate via SSO, that is your Databox email and password. Once you do have it, you can talk to your data using natural language. Let's ask it about my Google Analytics 4 data at a glance. Let's see what it gives. Now, as you go along, it will ask you for further permissions to be able to access your accounts and then access specific data sources and then specific metrics. Typically, you only have to do this once, and then it will have the necessary permission. The time it will take will vary depending on how much data you have, how many data sources trying to pull. As you give enough the initial permissions and so forth. But this is kind of pretty cool. Took the Google Analytics 4 data, and now it is given summary of the data within the LLM itself. What I'm excited about from the MCP perspective is that you could do this across multiple data sources if you have them. They can imagine that you can then ask about your multiple ad platforms, compare them against each other. You can then bring in industry-related context, such as, hey, what are some of the average click-through rates that we're seeing on ad platforms right now in the e-commerce space over the last 90 days? Try and find a resource for that, or you can just give it yourself if you need to. This is just simply another way for people to interact with the data and reduce friction when it comes time to analyze it. Data boards and reports can be fantastic to help you understand what's going on at a glance, and then the LLMs can help you shortcut a lot of the work, and you can just go back and forth with it as if the LLM was a data analyst assistant that is able to look at all the data and compile it in a way that makes sense. Step 5, let's think ahead now. You've been looking at everything on how to report data from the past, the last 30 days. Maybe you put it into a data board that you can then show on TVs or with the rest of your team, or you put those into a report where you can add more context for stakeholders and then schedule either the reports or the data boards to go out, send them to Slack. But Databox has also started to think about how you can start thinking ahead and play more of an offense with your data. So let me show you a couple of features around that. The first feature we have is goals and OKRs. So you can actually bring in the internal goals that you're trying to hit with your team and put them alongside the correct metric in your data. Let's imagine that we are trying to hit total users on the website, and we're going to make this for the entire year of 2026. We'll put it next. Then this is where I think the real cool magic happens. Now you can actually take a metric from your Databox account. And in this case, we do have a metric, which would be total users. We're not going to do any kind of breakdown. And we want to reach 10,000 total users by the end of the date we chose, which was the end of 2026. Let's save that. And then Databox will go and find the correspondent historical data and then show it here. So you can see here in this case, about 11% to this goal of 10,000. And you can have individual goals, you can have team goals, company goals. Those are OKRs. We can actually structure objectives, and then typically an objective might have multiple sub goals underneath it. So you get lots of flexibility on how you show this. And this becomes something you can add to a data board or report. So within the same location where you're showing data on the data board or report, now you can also show progress towards specific goals and attach them to real data. The Databox will then keep in sync for you on whatever frequency you chose. You don't have to wait multiple weeks or months to see, hey, how do we do on Q1? You could see this pretty quickly after Q1 ends. The second feature that can help you start to think ahead with your data are forecasts. Forecast can be seen as a step before you create goals, just to be able to simulate different possibilities based on your data, real data from the sources you're pulling, to understand what could be possible in the next quarter or in the next year. Let's go and forecast the same total users metric that we have. I have to go and pull historical data from Google Analytics and ensure it is within the same Databox account. Again, from your perspective, it is all happening behind the scenes. It might take some time, and then once it's ready, it will display it for you. Yeah, so back. I took about 4 minutes to do everything. Now, it would be expected actually to be about 5,500, assuming I'm using the same strategies from the past year. We have an optimistic forecast, a regular forecast, and a more pessimistic version. We can change timeframes here. You're able to choose the period when you save the forecast. You can create multiple forecasts. We adjust for seasonality and a few other things. This might not be something you're using all the time, but during your planning season, ahead of a quarter or ahead of a year, you can start to look at what the numbers are for specific metrics from your data sources. Again, this is all real data. And understand what things could look like over the next 3, 12 months, whatever period you're looking forward. And from there, you can establish what goals you want to hit. So this, 10,000 user goal that we set a few minutes ago might be doable on the more optimistic side, especially if we put a little bit more effort on how to improve or increase this metric. And down here, you can see the forecast had and what the actual numbers are along the way, which is kind of similar to goals. But you can see if you're pacing alongside that forecast that you saw beforehand. Both of these tools can help you start to plan ahead with your data and say, hey, where do we want to go? What goal do we want to hit? How do we want to forecast the potential changes in this metric, and then create corresponding goals to support that forecast. And of course, still have the data boards and the reports themselves to report on your progress along the way. So the 5 steps: you start by ingesting data, you do some light transformations to it, you build a data board with the most important KPIs, and then of course have reports as a secondary option to be able to display even more context alongside your data. And you can then start to plan ahead with goals and forecasts to really be more aggressive with your numbers and start to improve them in the direction that you want them to. Don't stop here though. I highly recommend that you check out the next video that YouTube thinks you will enjoy. My name is Ruben Ugarta. I'll see you in the next video.